Republicans are taking their fight against voting rights to the courts of appeals in this country. Welcome back to Democracy Docket.
There are at least 13 ongoing cases where Republicans have lost a lawsuit that was targeting some aspect of the voting and election process, but have appealed that victory for voters. And in at least 6 of the cases, the RNC itself has appealed those victories for voters in Nevada, Mississippi, New York, Montana, and 2 cases in Arizona. Mark, which of these cases are most concerning for you?
Yeah, so look, I mean, the first thing this tells us is the Republicans lose a lot of lawsuits. I mean, like they issue a lot of press releases about how they are, attacking voting rights and they got websites and everything, Sophie, around this. But it turns out at the end of the day, what these numbers tell you first and foremost is that they are filing lawsuits. Law firms like mine and others are defending against these lawsuits, and Republicans are losing. And now we're in the stage where they are going to the Court of Appeals. And look, my job is to worry about each and every one of these lawsuits, right? So I am very focused on the ballot receipt deadline case in Mississippi that they have appealed to the Fifth Circuit. You will see that this is a recurring theme. If you read Democracy Docket, you know that Republicans are obsessed with stopping counting ballots. I mean, look, so if it was up to them, they wouldn't count ballots to begin with. But they are obsessed with stopping counting mail-in ballots that come in after Election Day, even if they're mailed in advance. They are appealing a loss in a case involving the election procedure manual in Arizona. That is, Sophie, exactly what it sounds like. This is literally the manual by which elections are conducted. Guess what? Republicans don't want a manual that tells people how to conduct elections. They want chaos. They want to be able to say that there was no uniform standards across counties. And the way they do that is by challenging the election procedure manual. In New York, Sophie, they are fighting against the Early Mail Voter Act because, well, that's what Republicans do. And even in New York, they are appealing their losses there. The Arizona citizenship case, this is a big one, Sophie. This is pending before the United States Supreme Court, and we are all awaiting to see how that case is determined. And I promise you, everyone watching this video, if you are not subscribed to Democracy Docket, you need to do so now, because as soon as that breaks, an alert will go out from Democracy Docket, and you will get that in your inbox. So the link is in the show notes below and above. The Montana voter registration penalty case. This is a weird case. This is a case where Montana passed a law to essentially try to criminalize people who were registering in Montana but had not yet, wait for it, deregistered in their prior state. I mean, Sophie, who does that? Who calls their prior state when they move and say, please, deregister to vote? They just don't register. They just don't vote there, right? So that law got struck down. They are appealing that. And most recently, just, literally hours ago, the Republican Party has appealed a loss they had in Nevada involving mail-in ballots, and that's going to now go to the Ninth Circuit. And Sophie, here's my prediction: they're also going to appeal their state court loss in Nevada. That has not yet happened, but if I know anything about Republicans, it's when they lose these cases, they then bring appeals so that they can lose once again.
So you mentioned these mail-in ballot receipt deadline cases that the RNC has lost in several states and have appealed these victories for voters in Mississippi and now in Nevada. But in the Mississippi case, they have appealed that decision to the notoriously ultra-conservative Fifth Circuit. So in the Fifth Circuit, if they were to rule in favor of the Republican National Committee, what would happen to the other ongoing cases in Nevada and Illinois? And what would happen to the 20-some other states that have these post-election day ballot receipt deadlines?
Yeah, I mean, can you believe that we are literally in the middle of August and Republicans are still prosecuting these cases through the courts of appeals? I mean, everyone needs to be outraged by what is happening. And yes, the Fifth Circuit case is, I believe the Republicans brought this case in Mississippi, not because they actually care about these ballots being counted in Mississippi. In fact, as Democracy Docket covered, the Republicans in Mississippi were willing to repeal the law that the RNC is challenging. But the RNC didn't want the law repealed because they want this case going up in the Fifth Circuit so that they can try to get a win in some circuits. So as you pointed out, They have been fighting these cases in a variety of courts, in a variety of circuits. The Illinois case is in the Court of Appeals. The Ninth Circuit case now will be the Nevada case will now be in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They are trying to get some court somewhere to agree with them. They have been unable to get any judge anywhere to agree with them. And if they got the Fifth Circuit to agree with them, well, now they've set up a circumstance where it wouldn't be binding on the other circuits, but they would be able to at least start to make the rhetorical argument that they have won on this issue. And, we all know that Donald Trump is an election denier, and Donald Trump uses any scrap of victory he can get anywhere to argue, frivolous arguments elsewhere. The other thing, Sophie, I think that's going on here is that they are looking, even if they lose in the Fifth Circuit or they lose in the Ninth Circuit, they're looking for a vehicle to get up to the United States Supreme Court, because they are banking that they can get 5 justices of the Supreme Court to agree with this absolutely outrageous, frivolous argument they have to strike down these laws. Sophie, in how many states you said it was?
Over 20 different states.
Yeah. So
and U.S. territories as well.
Yeah. So think about how much havoc they could create by having essentially manufactured a case in Mississippi that they really didn't care about, and that the state of Mississippi was willing to repeal the law. So that's their goal. Their goal is to make it harder to vote, to sow chaos, to create a lack of confidence in the elections. And that's what so many of these lawsuits are about.
So you mentioned the Arizona citizenship case has already been brought up all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the RNC is asking for an emergency stay to reinstate Arizona's strict proof of citizenship law. What do you expect the Supreme Court to rule, and what effect could that have on the election in Arizona?
Yeah, so the first thing I want everyone to understand is, when Republicans talk about these proof of citizenship laws, it conjures up an image that what they are really doing is affecting non-citizens. I mean, non-citizens already can't vote in this country. It's already a federal crime for them to vote in this country. They don't register to vote. States have all kinds of ways to prevent them from being on the voter rolls. What these proof of citizenship laws do is they require people like you and me and people in our audience to prove citizenship. And let me be clear, if you don't have a US passport, proving citizenship is really hard. So they don't disenfranchise non-citizens. They already can't vote. They're already disenfranchised. They disenfranchise voters who are registering for the first time. Guess who those are, Sophie? Those tend to be younger voters, right? Because many, if not most, younger voters don't have a passport or other proof of citizenship available. In terms of when we are expecting a ruling, I mean, let's see, what time is it right now? I mean, who knows, right? The briefs have all been filed. The Supreme Court could literally rule any moment now or any day now, which is why it is vitally important that everyone listening right now subscribe to Democracy Docket. It is a free news outlet that I created in 2020 to make sure that people have accurate, good information about what is happening to democracy in courts. The link are in the show notes below and above.
So you mentioned that we could get a decision from the U.S. Supreme Court about this Arizona citizenship law any moment now, any second now. But do you think we'll have a final decision in all of these cases before Election Day?
Look, I mean, Democracy Docket is tracking more than 150 cases, so we're not going to have decisions in all 150 cases. With respect to these cases that are going up to the Court of Appeals, I mean, the first thing I'd say is we already have decisions in those cases, right? The trial courts have ruled against the Republicans. The Republicans have lost. The Republicans are trying to undo that loss. So if the courts of appeals don't rule on those cases until after the election, then that's just the way the system works. But it is certainly the case the Republicans think that they have an advantage the higher up the system these cases go. So they are going to be pressing courts of appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court before Election Day to rule in as many cases as possible, which is something, by the way, we saw them do in 2020. There were 5 or 6 cases that went up in the final months of the 2020 election prior to Election Day to the Supreme Court on Republican efforts to make it harder to vote and ultimately to try to make it easier for them to cheat, for Donald Trump to cheat after he lost. And they were unsuccessful in those cases. And I anticipate that they will be unsuccessful again here. But look, these are the things that we all need to be paying attention to right now. There's a lot of moving parts right now about democracy, but what is happening in the courts right now is central to who's going to be able to vote and who's going to have their votes counted and what the post-election is going to look like.
So you talked about the hundreds of lawsuits that over at Democracy Docket we are tracking. And despite about the same number of pro-voting and anti-voting lawsuits being filed as of January of last year, there have been almost 2.5 times as many wins for voters than losses. Do you think that the courts will continue to protect voters from these Republican attacks?
It is ultimately the job of the political branches, Congress, state legislatures, governors, to protect voters and to protect fundamental rights. But when they fail, when they don't do their job, and Republicans in Congress prevented important legislation that would have protected voting rights and would have done away with a lot of this nonsense. And Republicans have passed voter suppression laws in state after state. And when the political branches fail, when Republicans attack voting rights in legislation, and when then they sick their legal teams on states, it is the job of the courts to protect fundamental rights. And there is no fundamental right more important in this country than the right to vote. It is the right from which all other rights are derived. If you care about the environment, you need to care about voting rights. If you care about women's reproductive freedom, you need to care about voting rights. If you care about immigration, whatever the issue you care about, you must care about voting rights. And if you are worried about the right to vote, you have to be focused on the courts, because the courts right now are the playing field. It is the place in which the two sides have aligned themselves. Republicans have aligned themselves with vote suppressors and trying to undermine the right to vote. Democrats have aligned themselves with expanding voting rights and protecting democracy. And it is up to all of us as citizens to remain informed about what is happening in these important cases, to spread good information about what is happening. That is why I started Democracy Docket in 2020. And it is why the Democracy Docket team of 14 people every day publish good, accurate information. And please, make sure you are subscribed to it. It is free, and it is an amazingly important resource in these very, very contentious times for democracy. Thank you all for joining this episode of Democracy Docket. We'll see you next time.